So if we rewind all the way back to, say, 1914, the whole American definition of success kind of just, well, it broke.
It completely fractured.
Right. Because, I mean, if you were to walk down the street in 1850 and ask someone, how do I become successful? They would have pointed you toward things like patience, frugality, temperance, golden rule, integrity.
The heavy stuff, the foundational character traits.
Exactly. But then, by the 1920s, that answer had just radically changed. Suddenly, success was all about smiling more, learning public relations, dressing the part, and projecting this constant positive mental attitude.
Which is such a massive pivot.
It is. In less than a lifetime, we collectively traded the foundation for the facade. And, well, today we are tearing down that facade.
Because it's honestly one of the most profound and least discussed cultural shifts of the entire 20th century. We moved from an agricultural, community-based understanding of human value to an industrial, highly urbanized one.
Right.
And in that process, we fundamentally rewired how we approach self-improvement altogether.
And that rewiring is exactly why we're pointing our lens today at a framework that basically rejects the facade entirely. So, welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are taking a massive stack of sources. We're talking historical analyses, corporate training breakdowns, psychological evaluations, and even some incredibly sharp modern critiques to deconstruct Stephen R. Covey's 1989 landmark book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Which is quite the undertaking, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. And I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now. You hear 7 habits, and your brain immediately conjures up, like, terrible middle management retreats and
shudder-inducing corporate buzzwords.
Yes, words like synergy and proactive.
Which is a tragedy, really, because those words have been entirely stripped of their original, rigorous psychological architecture.
Exactly the problem.
Yeah.
So our mission today isn't to give you some quick summary or a listicle of productivity hacks to help you clear your inbox faster. We don't want to do that.
No, we want to look at the actual mechanics of this operating system.
Right, like why did it sell over 25 million copies? What is actually happening on a neurological and behavioral level when you apply these principles?
And critically, we need to look at where this hyper-individualistic framework completely falls apart when it hits the friction of the real world.
We're getting into the critiques later, and they are fascinating. But to understand any of that, I think we have to go back to that 1914 fracture we mentioned.
Yeah, we do, because the bedrock of Covey's entire thesis is that to achieve anything of lasting value, you have to shift your operating system from the personality ethic back to the character ethic.
Right.
If you bypass that step, honestly, nothing else we discuss today will work.
So let's test that theory. Because the personality ethic is incredibly seductive. I mean, if I look at the landscape of modern advice, TikTok gurus, LinkedIn influencers, self-help podcasts, it is almost exclusively the personality ethic.
Oh, absolutely. It's all UI.
Right. It's 3 body language tricks to dominate a negotiation, or how to optimize your morning routine for maximum output. It's essentially optimizing the user interface of your life while completely ignoring the back-end code.
Yeah.
Why did we as a society become so obsessed with optimizing the UI?
Well, it really comes down to evolutionary biology and, the path of least resistance. The human brain is notoriously bad at valuing long-term invisible growth over short-term visible rewards.
We want the quick fix.
Always. And the personality ethic offers an immediate, highly visible return on investment. Think about it. When people migrated to cities during the Industrial Revolution, they were suddenly interacting with dozens of strangers every day.
Instead of the same 50 people they grew up with in a farming village.
Exactly. In a village, your character is your currency. Everyone knows if you are honest or if you're lazy. But in a massive city, first impressions become a survival mechanism. You need people to like you quickly to get a job, secure a loan, or find a partner.
So faking it till you make it literally became an evolutionary advantage in an urbanized society.
In the short term, yes. But that's exactly the trap Covey identifies. The personality ethic is like cramming for a test.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. You can memorize the facts, pass the exam, and look completely successful on paper. But a week later, you've forgotten everything because you didn't actually master the subject.
You don't possess the knowledge. You just rented it for the performance.
Precisely. And when you try to build long-term relationships or complex organizations using just the personality ethic, the system inevitably crashes. The back-end code is full of bugs, and people eventually sense the manipulation.
I mean, I see the logic there, but doesn't that imply we should just ignore our skills? Like, communication skills and a positive attitude aren't inherently bad things.
No, no, they aren't bad at all. And Covey doesn't dismiss them. He just relegates them to secondary greatness. Primary greatness is character.
Okay, I see.
If you have incredible communication skills, but your underlying motive is pure selfishness, your skills just make you a highly effective manipulator. The character ethic demands that you build the root system first. Integrity, humility, courage, justice.
And only then do the leaves of your personality bear actual fruit.
Exactly.
Which honestly requires a complete teardown of how most of us view the world. And the sources spend a lot of time on this concept of paradigms. And again, paradigm shift is a phrase that has been beaten to death in boardrooms.
It really has.
But Covey uses it in a very specific cognitive psychology sense, doesn't he?
He does. He uses it to describe the mental filtering mechanism through which you interpret reality. A paradigm is not what you look at, it is what you look through.
Like wearing tinted glasses.
Right. If your mental map of the world is based on the belief that everyone is out to get me, your brain will subconsciously filter out evidence of people being kind.
Oh yeah, confirmation bias.
Exactly. It will hyperfixate on every minor slight as absolute proof of your theory. You don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are.
Wow.
Covey's point is that if your mental map of a city is wrong, it doesn't matter how positive your attitude is. It doesn't matter how fast you drive. You are still going to be profoundly lost.
So the personality ethic just teaches you how to drive faster and smile while you're lost.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
But the character ethic forces you to pull over and redraw the map.
And that redrawing process is deeply uncomfortable because it forces us to align our subjective maps with objective territory. This brings in Jim Collins' foreword from the source material.
Right. Collins makes a really fascinating distinction there.
He points out that Covey didn't claim to invent the 7 habits. He didn't just sit in a cabin somewhere and dream them up. He identified them as natural laws.
Natural laws, like gravity.
Exactly like gravity. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to pull you to the ground.
It just is.
Right. Covey argues that human interactions and effectiveness are governed by principles that are just as unbreakable. Fairness, honesty, human dignity, service.
You can choose to violate these principles, like you can absolutely build a business on deceit and exploitation.
You can, but you cannot escape the consequences. The natural law of human trust will eventually assert itself, and the structure will collapse. True effectiveness is simply the act of aligning your internal paradigm with these external, immutable principles.
And the concept of working with reality instead of fighting it, that sets up the mechanical engine of the entire book. The PPC balance.
Yes, the golden goose.
I want to spend some real time here because our sources highlight this as the single most important metric for sustainable success. Covey uses the old Aesop fable of the goose that laid the golden eggs.
Right, the poor farmer who finds his goose is laying solid gold eggs.
Exactly. He gets rich, but he also gets incredibly impatient. He wants all the gold right now, so he slaughters the goose, cuts it open, and finds nothing. The goose is dead, and the production permanently stops.
It is the ultimate tragedy of misaligned priorities, and we see it play out in our lives every single day.
So let's map this onto the modern human experience. P stands for production.
Yeah.
The golden eggs. The desired results. PC stands for production capability. The goose. The asset producing the results.
Right.
One of our sources from a real estate investing network actually applies this to passive income, which I thought was interesting. If I own an apartment building, the P is the monthly rent check. The PC is the physical building itself.
And if you extract the maximum amount of rent, the golden eggs, but you completely refuse to spend money painting the walls, fixing the plumbing, or maintaining the roof, you are essentially starving the goose.
Yeah, in the short term, your profit margins look phenomenal.
But inevitably, the asset degrades. The good tenants leave, the building falls into total disrepair, and your production drops to zero.
But the physical asset is kind of the easy example. Where this gets terrifying is when we apply it to human capital, when we apply it to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Let's look at modern hustle culture. The 80-hour work weeks, the sleep when you're dead mentality.
Hustle culture is the systematic slaughter of the golden goose.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you are your own most vital asset. Your physical body, your neurochemistry, your emotional resilience, that is your production capability. When you pull 3 all-nighters in a row to hit a deadline, you are generating an enormous amount of P. The project gets done.
The golden egg is delivered.
Exactly. But the biological cost to your PC is severe. Your cortisol levels spike, your cognitive function degrades, your immune system crashes.
And if you maintain that imbalance, you don't just get tired, you break the machine. Burnout is basically just the biological consequence of prioritizing P over PC for too long.
It is. But you know the reverse is also true.
Right. I know people who are utterly obsessed with PC. They go to therapy 3 times a week. They read every single self-help book. They meditate. They go to retreats. They are endlessly preparing,
Yeah.
but they never actually produce anything.
They never ship the product.
Never. They never commit to a relationship. They have the healthiest, most pampered goose in the world, but they absolutely refuse to let it lay an egg.
A brilliant observation. Total fixation on PC creates a state of perpetual preparation. It's an avoidance tactic. Effectiveness is not found at either extreme. It is the precise equilibrium between the two.
You have to feed the goose, but you also have to gather the eggs.
And constantly monitoring that friction between output and capacity is what prepares you to actually enter the sequential framework of the habits.
Sequential being the operative word here. You don't just pick habit 4 because it sounds fun today.
No, you can't.
The sources detail a structure called the maturity continuum, and it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about how we develop. We all start at dependence.
Right. Dependence is the paradigm of you. You take care of me. You are responsible for my feelings. If something goes wrong, it is your fault.
We begin life physically and emotionally dependent on our caregivers, obviously.
But the issue is that many people remain emotionally and intellectually dependent well into adulthood. They rely on their boss for their career trajectory, their spouse for their emotional stability, and society for their entire worldview.
The first 3 habits are designed to rip us out of dependence and drag us to independence.
The paradigm of I.
Exactly. I am responsible. I can choose. That is a private victory.
Hmm.
But the continuum doesn't stop there, which, completely subverts the Western ideal of the self-made, rugged individualist.
Western culture totally idolizes independence. We view it as the ultimate summit of human development. But Covey argues that independence, while a necessary stepping stone, is insufficient for true effectiveness.
Right, because a purely independent person might be a great individual contributor, but they are a terrible leader and a frustrating partner.
Right. The actual summit is interdependence. The paradigm of we. We can combine our talents. We can create something greater than the sum of its parts.
But you can't be interdependent until you are truly independent. You can't combine fractions and expect a whole. So the journey has to begin with habit 1. Be proactive.
And we need to pause here because being proactive has been so diluted over the years.
It really has. It just means taking initiative now, right? Like, oh, I proactively restocked the printer paper before we ran out.
Right. Taking initiative is a behavioral byproduct, but the core mechanism of habit 1 is infinitely deeper than that. It is an existential claim about human agency. Being proactive means acknowledging that your behavior is a function of your conscious decisions, not just a byproduct of your conditions.
Which is a massive, incredibly difficult claim to swallow. Because our sources talk about the social mirror, which is this constant barrage of deterministic programming society feeds us.
It tells us we are just the sum of our inputs.
Exactly. We have genetic determinism. I have a terrible temper because my grandfather had a terrible temper. It's just in my DNA. We have psychic determinism. I am emotionally unavailable because my parents got divorced when I was 7. My childhood dictates my present.
And environmental determinism.
Right. I can't succeed because the economy is rigged, my boss is a narcissist, and my spouse doesn't support me.
Determinism is the ultimate abdication of responsibility. It allows us to remain comfortably in the dependent stage. It's not my fault.
So how do we dismantle that?
To dismantle this, Covey leans heavily on the harrowing experiences of Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps.
Such a powerful story.
It is. Frankl was stripped of his family, his profession, his dignity, and his physical freedom. By every measure of environmental determinism, he should have been reduced to a pure animal state of reaction.
But he realized something profound while he was quite literally starving in a death camp. He realized that the guards could control his entire environment, but they could not control his internal response to that environment.
Right. Frankl articulated what is arguably the most important psychological concept in this entire framework. Between stimulus and response, there is a space.
A space.
Yes. In the animal kingdom, there is no space. A dog is subjected to a stimulus, and its biology dictates the response. But humans possess a unique neurological architecture. We have self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will.
So in that microsecond, Between the boss yelling at you the stimulus
Hmm.
and you reacting the response, you actually have the power to choose.
Hmm.
Okay, let me push back heavily on this. Because the gap between stimulus and response sounds beautiful in a book, but in reality, when someone cuts you off in traffic or a toxic boss humiliates you in a meeting, your amygdala literally hijacks your brain. Cortisol floods your system.
That's true. The biology is real.
Right. For someone with severe CPTSD or deep trauma, they can't just choose to find the space. The space is a neurological minefield. Are we just bordering on toxic positivity here? Like, just choose to be happy?
No, you're hitting on a core vulnerability of how this habit is often misinterpreted. Habit 1 is not toxic positivity. It absolutely does not deny the reality of trauma or the massive chemical influence of a flooded amygdala. Covey is not saying you can magically choose not to feel the panic.
Because the physiological response happens regardless.
The trauma is real. What Habit 1 suggests is that the action you take after the chemical flood is still within your locus of control, even if that control is incredibly microscopic at first.
Ah, okay. So it's not about preventing the emotion. It's about not letting the emotion write the final script.
Exactly. It's about exercising that muscle. Every time you delay a reaction by even 1 second, you are increasing neuroplasticity. You are widening the space between stimulus and response.
That makes a lot more sense.
And to operationalize this, Covey introduces the circle of concern and the circle of influence.
This is such a brilliant visual model. Imagine a large circle, the circle of concern. It holds every single thing you worry about. The national debt, the threat of nuclear war, the algorithm changing on your social media, your coworkers' annoying habits, the weather.
Right. And now draw a smaller circle inside of that one. This is your circle of influence. It contains only the things you can directly manipulate. Your own attitude, the words you use, your work ethic, your sleep schedule, your response to the weather.
The mechanism here is entirely about energy allocation. Reactive people living in the paradigm of determinism spend all their mental and emotional energy in the outer circle of concern.
They doom scroll the news.
They gossip about the CEO's terrible decisions, they complain about the rain.
And what happens structurally when you focus on things you cannot control? You generate a massive amount of anxiety and victimhood. You feel helpless. And because you are ignoring the things you can control, your actual circle of influence begins to shrink.
Your relationships atrophy.
Yeah,
Your skills stagnate.
exactly. Proactive people do the exact inverse. They might care deeply about the national debt, but they recognize they can't change it today, so they ruthlessly focus their energy on the inner circle of influence.
They budget their own money. They improve their own skills.
And as they do that, they build competence and trust, which literally causes their circle of influence to expand outward.
But let's use an example.
Yeah.
If you have a toxic boss, a classic circle of concern problem, complaining about them to your coworkers only increases the toxicity. It shrinks your influence.
Right.
But if you focus on your circle of influence, delivering pristine, undeniable work, maintaining absolute professionalism, upskilling on your weekends, you expand your options.
You might eventually become so indispensable that you influence the boss, or, more likely, you build a resume that allows you to easily find a better job. You use the space between stimulus and response to author a different outcome.
So if habit 1 proves that we have the remote control to our brains, the immediate, terrifying realization is we have to actually choose what channel to watch.
We do. We have to take responsibility for the programming.
If we don't write the script, the social mirror writes it for us. And that existential dread is exactly what necessitates the next step, designing the blueprint. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind.
The foundational premise of Habit 2 is that all things are created twice. There is a mental creation and a physical creation.
Like a building, you don't just order a truckload of bricks and start aggressively spreading mortar around.
No, you hire an architect, you draw the blueprints. The mental creation happens months before a shovel hits the dirt.
If you skip the mental creation, you are building by default. You end up constructing a life based on the blueprints handed to you by your parents, your culture, or, the marketing algorithms on your phone.
And to force us out of this default mode, Covey proposes an exercise that is jarring, viscerally uncomfortable, and highly effective.
The funeral exercise. I want you, the listener, to actually visualize this right now. Don't just gloss over it. Imagine you are walking into a funeral parlor. You feel the heavy carpet, you smell the lilies, you hear the hushed whispers of the people sitting in the pews. You walk up the aisle to the open casket,
When you look inside,
and you see yourself. This is your funeral 3 years from today.
it immediately triggers terror management mechanisms in the brain. It forces you to confront the finite nature of your existence.
And as you sit down in the front row, you look at the program. There are 4 speakers scheduled to deliver your eulogy. One is a family member, a spouse, a child, or a sibling. The second is a close friend. The third is a colleague from your profession. And the fourth is someone from a community organization you served.
The brutal question Habit 2 asks is, what do you want those 4 people to say about you?
Notice what the exercise naturally eliminates. No one in that hypothetical funeral is going to talk about how efficiently you cleared your email inbox.
Right, no one is going to mention that you drove a luxury car or that you successfully maximized shareholder value in Q3. The proximity of death acts as a ruthless filter for what constitutes actual human value.
It strips away the UI and exposes the back-end code. You realize that you want your children to say you were present and kind. You want your colleagues to say you had uncompromising integrity. But if you look at your current calendar, you are spending 80 hours a week chasing the promotion and 0 hours being present with your kids.
The blueprint doesn't match the building.
Exactly.
That dissonance is the catalyst for change. It reveals what Covey calls your center. Whatever sits at the center of your life is the source of your security, your guidance, your wisdom, and your power.
And most of us have accidentally centered our lives on highly volatile external factors. Our sources actually break down these alternative centers.
Let's look at the money-centered person.
Okay, yeah. If your entire identity and sense of security is tied to your net worth, what happens when the market crashes?
Your identity is completely destroyed. You have no internal foundation. Or consider the work-centered person. They derive all their value from their job title. If they get laid off, they don't just lose a paycheck, they experience a total existential crisis. They literally do not know who they are without the badge.
Even being family-centered or spouse-centered, which sounds noble at first, can be incredibly destructive.
It can. If your spouse is your entire center, you become overly dependent, jealous, and emotionally fragile. You place an impossible burden on another human being to be the ultimate source of your stability.
Because anything external can be taken from you. So what is the alternative? Covey argues the only stable foundation is a principle center.
Principles do not react to stock market crashes. Principles do not divorce you. Principles do not fire you. If your life is centered on the immutable laws of fairness, integrity, honesty, and service, your security comes from within. You have an unchanging core. When chaos strikes, you filter your decisions through those principles rather than through panic or greed.
And defining those principles is how you write your personal mission statement. That is the ultimate outcome of Habit 2. You write the constitution of your own life.
But a constitution is just a piece of paper until you enforce the laws.
Right. Having a beautiful blueprint doesn't build the house. You have to actually pour the concrete, and it's heavy, and it takes time, which moves us from the mental creation to the physical creation. Habit 3, put first things first.
This is where philosophy meets the calendar. This is the domain of personal management and execution.
And it introduces a concept that completely changed how I look at my own day. The time management matrix. It divides everything we do into 4 quadrants based on 2 metrics: urgency and importance.
Right. Urgency is external pressure. A ringing phone is urgent. A deadline is urgent. It demands immediate attention. Importance, however, is internal alignment. Does this task contribute to your personal mission statement? Does it feed the golden goose?
So quadrant vis is urgent and important. These are crises. Your kitchen is on fire, you have a medical emergency, a major client is threatening to pull their contract today. You have to be in quadrant I sometimes.
But Quadrant I operates entirely on adrenaline and cortisol. It is exhausting.
Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. This is the illusion of productivity. The phone ringing, the constant Slack messages, the pointless meetings. You feel incredibly busy, but you aren't actually advancing your core goals. You're just reacting to other people's priorities.
And Quadrant 3 is not urgent and not important. Doom scrolling on social media, binge watching reality TV, busy work, it's pure escapism.
The problem is the neurochemistry of the modern world. Our brains are evolutionary wired to prioritize urgency.
Because for our ancestors, a rustling in the bushes was urgent. It was a tiger. If you ignored the urgent, you died. So our brains reward us with a hit of dopamine when we solve an urgent problem, even if that problem is just an irrelevant email. We are biologically addicted to quadrants the first and 3.
Which brings us to the magic quadrant. Quadrant 2, important but not urgent. This is the realm of relationship building, long-term strategic planning, preventative maintenance, exercise, reading, deep work.
The tragedy of Quadrant 2 is that it has no external pressure. No one is screaming at you to go to the gym today. No one is urgently demanding that you spend an hour meditating or writing a business plan for 5 years from now.
Because there is no urgency, there is no immediate dopamine hit. Q2 provides zero short-term neurological reward, but it yields massive compound interest over time.
And the human brain is terrible at valuing compound interest. We suffer from hyperbolic discounting. We prefer a small reward now, like answering a Slack message, over a massive reward later, like writing a book.
That is exactly why Habit 3 requires the independent will you build in Habits 1 and 2.
Because prioritizing Quadrant 2 requires you to actively suppress your evolutionary impulse to respond to urgency. The secret of highly effective people is that they shrink Quadrant A crises by spending the vast majority of their time in Quadrant 2 prevention.
Right. If you spend time in Q2 maintaining your car, you prevent the Q1 crisis of the engine exploding on the highway. If you spend time in Q2 building a relationship with your spouse, you prevent the Q1 crisis of a divorce.
To make this tangible, the sources use the famous big rocks analogy. Imagine an empty glass jar. You have a pile of large rocks, some gravel, and some sand. The jar represents your time.
The sand and gravel represent the minor, urgent tasks of Q3 and Q4. The big rocks represent your Q2 priorities, your family, your health, your major life goals.
If you approach your day by filling the jar with sand and gravel first, doing all the easy, urgent tasks with the intention of getting to the big things later, you will fail. The jar fills up. The physics don't allow the big rocks to fit.
You run out of time and energy.
Exactly. But if you place the big rocks into the empty jar first, you establish your non-negotiables, then you pour the gravel in, and it fills the gaps between the big rocks. Then you pour the sand, and it sifts down into the remaining spaces.
The only way to live an effective life is to schedule your priorities, rather than trying to prioritize your chaotic schedule. As the author E.M. Gray noted in the sources, successful people simply have the habit of doing the things that failures don't like to do. They subordinate their impulses to their values.
And if you can master that, if you can be proactive, design your blueprint, and execute your priorities, you achieve the private victory. You are officially independent.
You are no longer a victim of your circumstances or your impulses. But as we established earlier, independence is not the summit. A bunch of fiercely independent people in a room together is just a recipe for conflict. We have to move into the public victory. We have to achieve interdependence.
Which requires opening a shared space. And that requires a fundamental shift in how we view human interaction, leading us to Habit 4. Think win-win.
Now, win-win is probably the most abused phrase in the corporate lexicon.
Oh, without a doubt.
It usually just means, let's compromise so neither of us is totally furious.
Yeah.
But in Covey's framework, win-win is not a negotiation tactic. It is an underlying philosophy based on the abundance mentality.
Right, because most of the world operates on a scarcity mentality. They view life as a zero-sum game. If there is a pie and you get a large slice, that mathematically means my slice is smaller. Therefore, your success is a direct threat to my survival.
I must compete with you. I must hoard resources, withhold information, and ensure that I win and you lose. The scarcity mentality is so deeply embedded in our institutions. Think about the grading curve in universities. I literally cannot get an A unless someone else gets a C. We artificially manufacture scarcity to force competition.
And we do it in corporations all the time. Consider a sales team where only the top performer gets the end of year bonus, but the manager expects the team to collaborate and share best practices.
It's structurally impossible. You are asking good people to work together in a bad system that actively rewards them for slitting each other's throats.
Exactly. Systems dictate behavior. Habit 4 requires you to design win-win systems. The abundance mentality is the realization that the pie is not finite. We can bake a bigger pie. Human potential, creativity, and wealth are not zero-sum. One person's success does not come at the expense of another's.
But to achieve win-win, you have to be willing to embrace no deal.
Win-win or no deal. That is such a massive paradigm shift.
If we're trying to negotiate a business partnership and we can't find a solution that genuinely benefits both of us, we agree to walk away. No deal. We don't force a compromise where we both secretly resent each other. Removing the pressure to close the deal at all costs actually frees both parties to be completely honest about what they need.
But here's the critical friction point. How do you actually know what the other person considers a win? You cannot achieve win-win if you are just guessing at their motivations.
Which brings us to the hardest habit in the book. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And this entire habit rests on the concept of the emotional bank account.
It is a profound metaphor for relational trust. Every interaction with another human being is either a deposit or a withdrawal from your emotional bank account with them.
Deposits build trust, keeping a promise, clarifying expectations, showing genuine kindness, and, crucially, offering a sincere apology when you make a mistake. Withdrawals destroy trust, interrupting, breaking promises, displaying arrogance, or assuming you know what they feel.
And the absolute largest deposit you can make is empathic listening. Because if we are completely honest with ourselves, almost none of us actually listen. We engage in what the sources call autobiographical listening. We listen with the intent to reply.
We are just waiting for the other person to pause to take a breath so we can hijack the conversation.
Yes. Someone comes to you and says, I'm having a really hard time with my teenager. And immediately, instead of understanding them, you say, oh, I know exactly how you feel. When my kid was that age, I did X, Y, and Z. Have you tried taking away their phone?
We immediately project our own autobiography onto their pain.
Covey equates this to prescribing a solution before you have diagnosed the problem. He uses the analogy of the optometrist. Imagine you go to the eye doctor and say, my vision is blurry. The doctor immediately takes off his own glasses, hands them to you, and says, here, wear these. I've been wearing them for 10 years and they work great for me.
You put them on, and your vision gets worse.
And when you complain, the doctor gets defensive. What's wrong with you? I'm just trying to help. After all these glasses have done for me, you're just being ungrateful. You would never trust that doctor again because he didn't diagnose you. He just prescribed his own paradigm.
But we do this constantly in our marriages, our friendships, and our workplaces. We throw our glasses at people and demand they see the world exactly as we do. Why do we do this?
Because genuine empathic listening is psychologically dangerous. To truly understand another person's paradigm, you have to step inside it. You have to look at the world through their eyes. And when you do that, you open yourself up to the possibility that your paradigm might be wrong.
You risk having your own mind changed.
Most people are too insecure to take that risk, so they stay safely behind their own defenses, dispensing advice.
Covey argues that when people are in emotional pain, what they need before advice, before solutions, is psychological air. When you feel misunderstood, your amygdala triggers a threat response. You are literally in fight or flight mode. You cannot process logic. You cannot be reasoned with.
Empathic listening acts as an emotional de-escalator. When you reflect back someone's feelings without judgment, without prescribing a solution, you provide psychological air. Their defense mechanisms lower.
Only after they feel deeply understood, only after they are breathing freely can you move to the second half of the habit. Then to be understood. You earn the right to speak by proving you have listened.
And when you have two people who are committed to win-win and who have deeply understood each other's paradigms, the conditions are finally set for the ultimate public victory. Habit 6. Synergize.
Synergy is the phenomenon where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Right.
1 + 1 = 3, or 10, or 100.
Again, we have to rescue this word from the corporate graveyard. Synergy isn't just, let's all hold hands and brainstorm on a whiteboard. What is the actual mechanism of synergy?
It is rooted in emergence, a concept found in complex biological systems. Consider the microbiome in your gut, or the structural integrity of an arch. An arch can hold massive amounts of weight that neither the two individual pillars could hold alone. The strength emerges from the relationship between the parts. In human terms, synergy relies on cognitive diversity.
Valuing the differences.
Exactly. If two people have the exact same paradigm, the exact same background, and the exact same opinions, one of them is unnecessary. You have 1 + 1 = 1. If they disagree and compromise, you have 1 + 1 = 1.5.
But if they trust each other, high emotional bank account, and understand each other, habit 5, they can look at a problem and realize that their individual paradigms are limited. They combine their perspectives to create a third alternative, a solution that simply did not exist in either of their minds prior to the interaction.
It's the realization that the world is too complex for any one brain to map accurately. You need multiple maps overlapping to find the actual territory. But let's be real for a second. Operating at this level, constantly being proactive, suppressing the urge to react, prioritizing Q2 planning, empathically listening to people who frustrate you, striving for synergy, it sounds exhausting.
It sounds like a recipe for the exact burnout we talked about earlier.
How do you sustain this?
This is where the framework proves its structural integrity. It looks back on itself to protect the goose. Habit 7. Sharpen the saw. The habit of continuous, intentional renewal.
The analogy is brilliant in its simplicity. A man is frantically sawing down a tree. He's been at it for hours, he's dripping with sweat, but he's making almost no progress because the blade is incredibly dull. A bystander says, "You look exhausted. Why don't you stop for 10 minutes and sharpen the saw?" And the man angrily replies, "I don't have time to sharpen the saw. I'm too busy sawing."
We laugh at the absurdity, but we do it every day. We say, I don't have time to exercise, I have too much work. I don't have time to read, I have to answer emails. We allow our physical and mental blades to dull because we are addicted to the urgency of sawing. Habit 7 requires quadrant to ducted discipline to renew yourself across 4 dimensions.
Our sources break these 4 dimensions down. The first is physical. This isn't just taking a bubble bath. It's the hard work of cardiovascular exercise, strength training, proper nutrition, and adequate sleep. It is physically maintaining the machine.
The second is spiritual. This does not necessarily mean religion. It means whatever reconnects you to your principal center. It could be deep meditation, spending silent time in nature, immersing yourself in profound art or prayer. It is recalibrating your compass.
The third is mental.
Mm.
And the sources make a frightening point here. For most people, mental atrophy begins the day they graduate from formal schooling. They stop reading challenging books, they stop writing to clarify their thoughts, and they surrender their cognitive bandwidth to the passive consumption of television and social media. Sharpening the mental saw requires intentional friction. You have to read outside your comfort zone.
And finally, the social and emotional dimension. You renew this by engaging in meaningful interactions, practicing empathy, and performing acts of service. Your emotional security is renewed when you realize you have value to offer your community.
When you constantly renew these 4 dimensions, you enter what Covey calls the upward spiral. You learn, you commit, you do. And because you're sharpening the saw, your capacity increases. So you move up to a higher plane where you have to learn, commit, and do all over again, but with greater understanding. The system is self-perpetuating.
It is an incredibly cohesive, holistic model of human psychology and development.
It is. But, and this is a massive but, if we stop here, we're doing you, the listener, a disservice. We've built the beautiful house, but now we need to see what happens when it gets hit by a hurricane.
Right, the real world.
Exactly. Our sources provide some incredibly sharp, rigorous critiques of Covey's framework.
Yeah.
And exploring these limitations doesn't destroy the model. It actually helps us understand exactly where and how to apply it. We need to look at this through a secular lens and a systemic socioeconomic lens. Now, as a reminder, we aren't endorsing any of these viewpoints or taking sides. We are simply reporting on the perspectives contained in our sources to give you the full picture.
A framework that claims to be based on universal natural laws must absolutely be stress-tested against different realities.
Let's start with the secular critique, specifically from an essay in our sources by a writer named Sean Powery. He highlights a context that is often scrubbed from the corporate training modules. Stephen Covey was a deeply devout, prominent Mormon, and while The 7 Habits is sold as a secular business text, Powery argues that Covey's theological worldview is baked into the very DNA of the model.
Powery points specifically to the underlying assumptions about where these principles come from. Covey explicitly writes that correct principles are natural laws, and he asserts that a divine creator is the source of them. Powery, analyzing the text from a secular perspective, challenges this absolute necessity of the divine.
Powery's argument is essentially, why do principles need God? He argues that what Covey calls divine natural laws are actually just highly refined human mental models. They are empirical observations about how reality functions. For instance, proactive people tend to succeed more often because reality favors preparation and adaptability. Over thousands of years, humans observed this pattern, codified it, and called it a principle. No deity is required. It is simply evolutionary psychology and game theory mapping the most effective ways for a social species to survive.
The secular critique also challenges Covey's absolute stance on human agency. The idea that between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose is the bedrock of Habit 1. But in the realms of modern neuroscience and philosophy, absolute free will is heavily contested. We know that neurochemistry, deep trauma, sleep deprivation, and genetics exert massive, sometimes overwhelming influence on our behavior. While the idea of total freedom to choose is empowering, the biological reality is often much murkier. Powery suggests the book operates on an idealized version of human cognition that doesn't always reflect biological constraints.
And beyond the biology, there's the sociology. This brings us to the second major critique in our sources, which I'll call the privilege and systemic critique. This comes from a reviewer looking at the framework through the lens of social equity. They point out a glaring reality. Covey wrote this book from a position of profound privilege. He was a white, highly educated, wealthy, healthy male living in the United States.
The reviewer argues that the entire Seven Habits framework assumes a level playing field. It operates in an economic and social vacuum.
And the danger of assuming a level playing field is that it weaponizes habit one against the vulnerable. If you take the extreme interpretation of be proactive, that your conditions don't dictate your outcomes, only your choices do, then the logical conclusion is that if you are failing, if you are poor, if you are marginalized, well, it is entirely your own fault. You just didn't choose a good enough response.
It leads straight to victim blaming. The framework essentially ignores the massive friction of systemic issues. How does think win-win work if you are a marginalized person dealing with institutional racism? You can't synergize with an institution that fundamentally denies your dignity. How does be proactive account for learned helplessness, a very real psychological state where an organism has been subjected to so much unavoidable pain that the brain literally stops trying to escape?
The reviewer makes a brutal assessment. They argue that by focusing entirely on the internal locus of control, the book inadvertently trains people to be compliant cogs in a broken machine. They actually use the phrase good-wage slaves. The critique is that the habits make you a highly efficient, non-complaining worker for a corporate board, but they do not teach you how to analyze or dismantle unjust systems. They teach you how to adapt to your environment, not how to rebel against a toxic one.
It is a profound structural limitation. The Seven Habits is an internal psychological framework. When you try to use it to solve external sociological problems, it breaks down. It cannot replace systemic reform.
And to round out the critiques, we have a stylistic note from a source by Curtis McHale, who basically says, the book suffers from the classic 1980s business book bloat. He argues it is heavily overwritten, the later chapters on synergy dissolve into confusing jargon, and it could probably be half as long.
Which is a valid critique of the packaging, even if the core operating system remains highly functional.
So we have traversed an immense amount of territory today. We've moved from the roaring 20s obsession with personality down into the root system of character paradigms. We've weighed the golden goose, navigated the psychological minefield between stimulus and response, visualized our own funerals, and examined the limits of individual agency in a systemic world. Where does this leave us? What is the final synthesis?
I think the synthesis is recognizing the framework for what it is: an exceptionally rigorous, demanding blueprint for personal governance. Whether you believe these habits are divinely ordained natural laws or simply the most optimized behavioral algorithms humans have developed, they work. They provide a structured mechanism for moving out of victimhood, taking ownership of your cognitive space, and building high-trust collaborations. It will not fix a rigged economy, and it will not cure clinical trauma, but as a method for expanding your personal circle of influence, it is unparalleled.
And for you, the listener, your takeaway isn't that you have to execute all 7 of these perfectly by tomorrow morning. You don't need to suddenly achieve absolute synergy during your morning commute. The value of a deep dive like this is the awareness it generates. It's about looking at your daily friction and asking the diagnostic questions. Am I hacking at the leaves of my behavior with quick fixes, or am I striking at the root of my character? Am I nurturing the goose, or am I just screaming at it to lay more golden eggs until my body finally gives out?
It is about finding that microsecond of space between the stimulus of your chaotic life and the response you choose to make.
Which brings us to our final thought. I want to leave you with something to process as you step back into your day. We talked about the funeral exercise and how our daily habits write the script of our legacy. If our habits truly dictate our character and our character dictates our destiny, what is one harmless daily habit you currently have that is secretly rewriting your personal mission statement without your permission? Is your doom scrolling, your avoidance of conflict, or your habit of complaining about things outside your control slowly painting over a rotting foundation? Because eventually the UI fails. The paint always peels. Make sure the code underneath is sound.
An incredibly vital question to carry forward.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.